It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in a control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Hey, listeners, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks, episode 59. If we were counting, and we're really not, we've been going for a lot longer than that, but this is our episode where we talk about political and media matters in this country and then move around the world to see what else is going on there. And joining me, as usual, is all the way in Hong Kong. Hong Kong Jack, g'day, mate.
G'day.
And tell me what's going on in Hong Kong at the moment. Bit cool.
Apart from shivering, not much. I know it's hot in Sydney, but it's not hot here.
Oh, it's not that warm. We were supposed to have a heat wave. Well, I'm not in Sydney, of course, but halfway between Sydney and Canberra. And we're supposed to have this heat wave. I don't know what it's like in Sydney, but here it's just kind of muggy, unseasonably muggy, but not hot. And we've had a very sort of mild summer so far with the rain. But give us the quick weather report from Hong Kong.
Oh, it's been sub 10 for most of the week. So that for me, that's stealing the palings off the back fence next door and burning them in the lounge room stuff. You know,
climate change in action, mate. Climate change in action. Told you, you've got to be ready for this stuff.
It's not as cool as it has been here. I know from my reading that in the 50s there were a few winters here where the telephone wires, remember when the phone used to come in through on wires on poles?
Well,
the telephone wires froze and snapped up on the peak. We haven't quite got it that cold.
No, you won't get any or you might be freezing personally, but you won't have anything frozen. With maximums just under 10. But that is Melbourne. That's actually Hobart weather, mate.
It is.
Well, we better get started with the show proper. And one of the big stories of the last few days is the resignation or the announcement of the resignation of one Scott Morrison, former Prime Minister, Jack. Well, firstly, where's he off to?
He's got a series of consultancies, I think, with some friends he made putting the AUKUS deal together. Yeah,
look, let's just briefly touch on that. I noticed that a number of the crossbenchers, some of the Teals were fairly upset about that. Not just that, but this sort of consultancies for life through relationships derived through his political career. As many do, both sides of the fence. Is it something that should be restricted for a period of time at least?
No, I don't think so.
It's one of those things. I mean, look, the people who are seeking him as a consultant are the ones seeking his contacts and his, I guess, nous, for want of a better term, and experience as a Prime Minister. So yeah, there are some sort of ethical issues there, but they're not just strictly with Scott Morrison. This is well covered territory for a lot of retiring senior politicians.
Some of them have done a better job of this than others, I might say.
Well, look, the gaming industry is kind of like a retirement village for the Labor Party, mate.
It is. The best of the ex-prime ministers in terms of managing that, I think, has been Julia Gillard.
Yeah, where does Morrison fit in the pantheon of prime ministers, Jack? Does he sneak in above Billy McMahon, or is he a bit below him?
Or I think Billy McMahon's the floor.
Never to be challenged.
No, I don't think so. Certainly, Scott Morrison became the most of ex-prime ministers very quickly.
Oh yeah,
and I think that was in large part because of the 5 secret ministries, because that destroyed the trust between he and his former colleagues. You know, people will forgive you for leading them to defeat, but they don't like that sort of deceit when it's used against them.
It was an act of deceit, wasn't it? He did actually, I believe he had the conversation with Greg Hunt first when he decided to become the health minister as well. And these things, well, it was part of a book written by Simon Benson and Martin Chambers, and Greg Chambers, and that was sort of understood and released and dunno. But then he took on the Treasury portfolio. Was it Foreign Ministry as well? I mean, and these were just unknown to his colleagues. So.
Yeah, people like Matthias Cormann and Josh Frydenberg did not know that he was also sworn in as minister for their portfolios. I actually think David Hurley, the Governor-General, has a case to answer on this as well.
Yeah, I agree.
I know that the Governor-General ought to, that the convention is they act on the advice of their Prime Minister, but they are allowed to ask questions. And I think the Governor-General should have been asking Morrison, did the ministers know about this, and was it properly, was it something that came out of the Cabinet? Was it a Cabinet decision? How did it come about?
Yeah, indeed. How would we describe his pandemic management? How would we describe just go to the COVID management? Does he deserve some praise for that?
Well, I don't think he was any worse than a lot of other politicians who were doing this on a wing and a prayer, really, not really knowing what they were doing.
Well, the story goes that the job seeker job keeper and job seeker allowance was increased during the period of the pandemic in the first year and a half, and job keeper was put in place. And the story goes that this was more or less a trade union development, and Morrison didn't want to pursue it, and Frydenberg had to convince him that had to keep people with sufficient finances to keep everyone in the family home fed.
Yeah, well, you'll always have those disputes amongst the ministry within cabinet, and I don't think they take you very far trying to analyse those, because people are doing this on the run, and you need that backwards and forwards. You need contrary views put so that you get to the right decision.
Well, speaking of the right decision, Jack, Australia Day, we talked about it last week. We believed that pretty much the debate had hit rock bottom last week, Jack. Bit of polling this week. Again, the polling is just really vague, but this was a sort of three-way question. And it said, keep the date, January 26th, and that got a 51% support. The other 49 was broken up between don't keep the date, find another one, and an alternative which would be the 26th of January and then another day on the 27th, two public holidays. Gee, I'd vote for that. But so that we had a 51-49. And the only thing I'd say about that is I think that's kind of reflects where we are. And it might be 55-45 or it might be 50-50, but it is dividing the nation, and views are very strongly held, Jack. There's nowhere, never the twain shall meet, basically.
Yeah, I was interested to see what Chris Minns, the New South Wales Premier, had to say. He's sort of old-fashioned New South Wales Labor fellow.
Yeah.
An admirable thing to be, in my view, because they generally have their finger on the pulse of what the community's feeling. And his attitude seemed to be, well, at the moment, this is Australia Day, so we should celebrate it. Now, if there's going to be a debate about what day it's on or some alternative arrangement, let's have that debate and come to a new date when we can get some agreement.
Well, that's pretty much what Albanese said too.
But in the meantime, it's Australia Day, so we celebrate it.
Yeah, that's pretty much what Albo said too. And he said, we will honour the date of the 26th of January as the start of the development of Western civilization in this country. Words to that effect as well. But he also played both sides of the argument. But he also said that he understood this was a great day of mourning and distress for many Australians. It's like I say, it just seems like that we're 50-50 on this, and give or take a few points. And I just don't know how this is going to give. Maybe in 10 years, 20 years' time, but you and I might not be around to see it. But over the next 2 or 3 years, I think this is going to become increasingly bizarre. It has led, of course, to, well, we start the second test against the West Indies, day-nighter at the Gabba. Oh, God, the ball moving around in the air there around dusk will have the West Indies battling a bit, but their batting is very light on, bowling good. But the Australia Day thing will not be used at the Gabba Test match, Jack, and we're recording this a day out from Australia Day.
Yes. Yeah, I suppose these organisations get to make their choice, and they'll please some people and upset some others.
Instead, a welcome to country ceremony will be conducted on the first day of the test. I actually thought it was today, so it's tomorrow, Australia Day. Australian Open tennis organisers will also err away from commemorating January 26 for the second year in a row. Yeah, and Chris Minns responded to that. But yeah, as you say, these are organisational. These are organisations who make their own minds up about what they want to do, and I think they're controversy averse. So I think that drives a lot of the decision making.
Yes, and they belong to they generally, the people who are making the decisions belong to the part of the community is going to be pro changing the date.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, but I also think that, you know, that they're trying to sort of slip under the public gaze a little bit there too, and try not to be too controversial. Woolworths CEO got on Breakfast TV, I think yesterday, and was talking about how Woolworths had not communicated well what their intentions were, and said that basically there had been so little need for stocking what is essentially a bit of patriotic tat, Jack. Been no great sales of it, and decided not to stock it this year. And he said that they didn't explain that very well, but he also made a plea to the people of Australia, can you please leave the staff alone? Because this is one thing. He said anecdotally he'd looked through a great many sort of incident reports of staff being abused and vilified while they're going about their business at Woolies, Jack. Not really good, is it? Pretty ordinary behaviour.
No, I don't agree with that at all. For whatever reason.
Yeah, pretty ordinary behaviour. Leave the staff alone. Hard-working, good Australians. And so there was some vandalism as well. I noticed Peter Dutton really hasn't addressed the issue of his call for a boycott on Woolworths. It was not his smartest move, and he could have just basically, you know, expressed a bit of rage over it without going that extra step, calling for a boycott. I thought that was excessive. And it leads us to the politics around the stage 3 tax cuts, Jack. I don't know, in Hong Kong you may not have been aware of the furor this has caused in our media, and allegations of promises broken, commitments disposed of by Albanese and the Labor government, and we'll get to those in a minute. Let's basically talk about what has happened in terms of stage 1, stage 2 and stage 3, which will kick in on July 1 of this year. Stage 1 was tax cuts for low and middle income earners, and it's worth about $1,080 a year to taxpayers earning between $30,000 and $126,000. Gee, we got middle income earners on $126,000? I suppose we do these days. Stage 2, which was brought forward from 2022 to 2020, when the limit was extended for another 2 years, raised the 32.5 marginal tax bracket from $37,000 to $90,000. To $45,000 to $120,000, and the threshold for when the 37% tax rate kicked in was raised from $90,000 to $120,000. The existing low income tax offset was also increased to include anyone earning less than $45,000. Now, stage 3 abolishes the 37% marginal tax bracket, completely and lowers the 32.5. Is this the intended, Jack? Is this the proposed?
That's the intended.
That was the
stage
original, right? So stage 3 abolishes the 37% marginal tax bracket. It was designed to abolish the 37% marginal tax bracket completely and lowered the 32.5% marginal tax rate to 30%. It was also supposed to raise the threshold for the 45% marginal tax rate, meaning everyone earning between $45,000 and $200,000 will pay or would have paid the same 30% tax rate. So where do we go from? Have you got an understanding of where the tax brackets are now, mate?
Well, not entirely, because they haven't.
They haven't fully announced everything.
Yeah, they haven't fully
been
announced
a few
what it's going to
things
look like.
in the Oz talking about. But the balance has moved from high-income earners, who would have been the major beneficiaries of stage 3 tax cuts, to middle and low-income earners again, Jack. Let's talk a little bit about the politics of this. Firstly, there's a risk that Albo will be accused of lying, perhaps lose a little bit of political skin over that. And then there are some real issues for the opposition. But let's start with what Albo and the government have got to do to sell this.
I mean, the 3-stage tax cut was sold on the basis of the first stage benefits part of the community, the second stage benefits a slightly larger part of the community, and the more well-off have to wait for the third stage. So that was how it was sold as a package. So walking away from that will have some political costs. I don't think a huge amount, but it has some.
I think I agree with that.
It just depends where it will land. A bit hard to say. I mean, I think the problems with the Australian tax system go much deeper than this, and that is that we're taxing too many people and paying them back.
I think that's part of the problem, and this, the restructuring of the stage 3 tax cuts, Jack, it basically kicks the reform can down the road, particularly on pay-as-you-go taxation, and there is a lot of double handling. And so, it strikes me as the sort of thing politically that's very sound in terms of short-term electoral gain, in the broader terms of much-needed reform to our tax system. It really just puts that on hold.
Yeah, it's a nothing reform in that sense. What the calling of the caucus back to Canberra to talk about this and the need to do this in mid-January, mid to late January, indicates to me in a political sense is that Dutton did have a pretty good year last year and Labor needed to do something to get back on the front foot right from the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and I think also the politics of the current time is that allowing the stage 3 tax cuts to go through with its, basically sort of engineered reform in it was always going to be a bridge too far for Labor. I mean, giving people, another $10,000 or $12,000 a year when they're earning $250, that would have looked awful. I actually think they've got the politics on this pretty right, and our good mate the pollster has been saying pretty much the same thing, that where this will hit, and of course the tax cuts don't kick in until July 1, but where this will hit is essentially where Peter Dutton is trying to win some votes, and that makes it very, very difficult for him. So does he oppose it? He says he will. I suspect the opposition will be pretty quiet on this.
Hard to say how that will pan out. My problem with the tax system dates back particularly to the Howard years, where it became the fashion to find new ways of giving government benefits to people who are relatively well off, professionals earning good money. And this was done by, keeping the tax rates relatively high. I think this is the wrong way to go about it. That's just double handling of the money, and the government takes a slice out of it all. So it does need proper reform, fewer government benefits, lower tax.
Yeah, I understand that, but let's deal with what we've got and look at the politics of it. we have a letter from our good mate Baseman. Actually, he'd be jumping up and down. He got published in the Sydney Morning Herald. And I'll read that letter to you now. Mr Albanese should abandon the $243 billion stage 3 tax cuts that will flow in the main to the nation's highest paid workers. This view is held by most economists and even some members of the opposition. The tax cuts were made when he had less debt and with a surplus on the horizon, according to then Treasurer Josh Frydenberg. In the present economic climate and with $1 trillion debt, the tax cuts are unsustainable. The PM's main concern is with breaking an election promise and being wedged by Mr Dutton. On the eve of the 2013 federal election, Tony Abbott promised no cuts to education, health, the ABC, the SBS and no changes to pensions. He not only broke those promises but many more. The coalition went on to win elections in 2013, 2016 and 2019. Quite clearly, breaking one election promise does not necessarily guarantee defeat at the 2025 election. Mr Albanese should try and convince Mr Dutton to act in the national interest and in an era of bipartisanship renounce the tax cuts. I don't think that's going to happen. What we're going to see from the opposition is Albo's a liar, all his caucus are liars, and indeed we've seen this from Susan Lay this morning. And they'll work that hard, and there is some skin possibly to be lost for Albo. But once these dollars hit pockets as of July 1, I think that will change and make things very, very difficult for the opposition. And how they play the politics around that, I suspect they will oppose this on the floor of Parliament. That won't do them any good because they'll be able to get them through. Labor will be able to get them through the Senate. The crossbenchers there, or enough of them, are supportive of this. And overall, I think it basically, as you say, I think it changes the political rhetoric for this year, acknowledging perhaps that not so much that Dutton had a good year, but that Albo had a pretty ordinary one. And it starts off with a new sort of narrative, and Labor will push endlessly. You can sort of see it coming as a sort of mantra that they will be saying that they are doing their best to assist people with the cost of living, with cost of living pressures. They'll recite that over and over again, and I think in the end that's reasonably good politics. It may not be great for the tax system, but it's pretty sensible politics. It reminds me a lot of the Howard days. Jack, and I just mean that Howard was never Labor Party played him all the wrong way. They sort of suggested he was an illegitimate prime minister and all this sort of stuff. They never got that right, and I think the opposition's making the same mistake around Albanese. But also Albanese is entirely pragmatic. As a member of the New South Wales left, you would imagine that he wasn't quite like that, but he is. He's an entirely pragmatic politician who makes decisions on what are the best interests, not so much of Australia, Jack, but of his Labor government.
Yeah, well, I think Dutton did have a great year last year, a very, very good year last year, because we're less than 12 months away from the debacle that was the Aston by-election. That's how low the opposition were in April last year, and they're much, much better placed now.
Well, the polling says no. The polling says no. Polling's pretty much just pretty constant. I mean, there's been a little bit of wavering late last year, but it's pretty much 53-47.
Yeah, but that's better than it was at Aston. Aston was a very, very low point for the coalition.
Well, better for the coalition, but it's actually worse than it was at the 2022 federal election. So that's what you gauge it on.
And Barry Cassidy had something interesting to say on social media this week, talking about Paul Keating and the best lines from Paul Keating. And one of them that Barry Cassidy remembered was that you don't try and hold your political capital, you actually use it.
Yeah.
And that's a very Paul Keating approach. For Albanese, though, last year he spent a hell of a lot of political capital on The Voice and didn't win. And if you're going to spend the political capital, you've got to make sure you get some benefit out of it. You've got to win.
Yeah, I took the time to have a look at Newspoll and other polling around, and it's January 2023. Labor improved a point as opposed to December of 2023. So they improved a point over the year, Jack. And that's the problem for the opposition. So you can say Peter Dutton had a great year, but people aren't really listening. And it's very, very difficult for an opposition leader to cut through a bit. But
I don't think he's likely to become Prime Minister. And
no, you've said that many times, and I agree with you. But I think these sort of stage 3 tax cuts really set up. This is really a wedge. This is a big wedge. Because he's been looking at the outer suburbs and the regions of Australia, the people who are statistically overrepresented in those particular areas, in those particular demographics, living in the outer suburbs, regions of Australia, and those are the people who are going to get, one, the benefits of tax cuts, and two, a shrinking inflation or CPI rate.
Yeah, if it comes off, it's a good move.
Yeah, it looks all right now. Now we're going to go overseas now, Jack. Israel, Gaza, and Iran and the Arab neighbours. We do have potentially escalating situation, and there is a little bit of sabre rattling being directed at Israel, Jack, from the Middle East. Okay.
There is, and something they are not unfamiliar with.
Yeah, it's a lot of rhetoric at this stage, isn't it? But there's a ceasefire. There are talks being arranged for between Israel and Hamas for a ceasefire, Jack. What does Hamas want from a ceasefire?
They want to retain their power, essentially.
No. And of course they would be required to return all hostages. There were hostage deals made around ceasefires earlier or later last year. And of course we've got South Africa taking up the cudgels, alleging Israel, the Israeli government is guilty of war crimes, Jack.
Yeah. Hamas want to retain their position in power. I don't think that's what Israel's Arab neighbours want, and it isn't what Israel wants. The Western media and people like Bob Carr keep talking about a two-state solution, but the Israelis don't want that, and nor do the Palestinian Authority or Hamas want that. So I don't know where that goes.
Classic stalemate, isn't it?
Yeah. The only people who want the two-state solution or prepared to argue for it don't live in the neighbourhood.
Yeah. Well, there needs to be some sort of resolution. I'd suggest to you, Jack, that the longer this goes, the harder it will be for Israel's standing in the global community. And they have a kind of vested interest, yes, in the removal of Hamas from power, but also to bring this to a stop.
Yeah, I think they're prepared to take a little bit of a hit with their standing in the international community to get the result they want, and I think their neighbours support them. Something that struck me this week was a Labor peer from the United Kingdom took a visit to Israel, and he's in the watching the arrivals board at Ben Gurion International Airport in Tel Aviv. The only foreign airline flying in from either North America or Western Europe was Delta. BA, Virgin, Ryanair, EasyJet, American, Air Canada, etc. had all cancelled their flights. But who was it who was flying into Israel? Etihad from Abu Dhabi, Emirates from Dubai, plus flights from Cairo, Amman, Bahrain and Morocco. And that's the relationship that I think that Israel will be keeping the closest eye on. Are their Arab neighbours still behind them in getting rid of Hamas? And I think they are.
All right. Electric vehicles, Jack. Of course, you think they're a hopeless waste of money like Donald Trump. You're turning a bit of a Trumpster, mate. Well, we got electric vehicles. We've got two reports here. Automotive executives talking about a cliff in EV sales and that's in the United States, is it not, or is that Europe? Because the sales data in Australia is pretty good.
Yeah. The reason I put this in is that there are two different stories happening at once here. One is that the sales are going up in Australia, and two, in Western Europe and the United States, they're falling in a bit of a heap. Ford's shutting down one of its production lines, I think, for for their F-150 Lightning, which is the electric version of their truck.
Yeah. Interesting. I thought we'd lose the weekend if we ever used one of those, Jack. Wasn't that was ScoMo's line, wasn't it?
It was a Scott Morrison line, I think.
Sales have plummeted in Germany of fully electric cars, have plunged 48%, and plug-in hybrid sales have tumbled 74%. Overall, new car sales in the country declined 23%. So I think we're looking at a bit of lies and damn statistics there, Jack. As if you've got 23% decline in new car sales, you're going to have a bit of a knock-on effect to the various EV categories. France, their new car sales went up 14.5%, and Spain 11%, but no figures on the electrical stuff.
No, but in Australia, they've gone up to, 0.6%.
Starting from a very low base, must be said.
Yeah, of course. But that's where we are. Anyway, we'll see how it pans out.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just visibly what we're seeing on our roads, a lot of these sales would be Teslas, almost certainly. I mean, it's like every third car around here is a Tesla at the moment. And that seems to mean, I don't know the figures, but I'd be surprised if they don't have 70% of the market, possibly more.
That happened in Hong Kong when there was a tax benefit, a reduction in the import duty on electric cars. And Hong Kong is full of Teslas, but as soon as that benefit to buying a Tesla was removed, the sales stopped completely. I believe the Tesla sales office here is closed now because no one's buying them at all. So we had a huge increase in the number, and then it stopped altogether.
Interesting. There's actually no incentive for car owners in New South Wales to buy EVs, Jack. There's no wholesale or other taxes being wiped away or anything like that. So it really is a question of people sort of, I guess, voting with their feet largely and buying mainly Teslas. Sales of battery EVs up by 7.2% in Australia. That's not just New South Wales. The New South Wales, the former government actually brought in a sort of road tax for EVs, Jack, because of course they're not paying their petrol tariffs, are they? They're not. No. They're not paying that, so they can. And my brother-in-law's got a Tesla of some description, and he reckons it costs him about $12 to charge it. So that a tank of fuel, if you like, costing him $12, and he's not paying any tariffs to the federal government on petrol. So the New South Wales government looked to address that. So there is actually an additional cost in buying an EV that wasn't there 2 years ago. We'll have to see how it goes. And I just think this is very, very early days for the development of alternate technologies to run automobiles. And I think we're going to look at significant changes. If it were me, and I'm actually looking at buying a new car maybe later in the year, I would look at a non-rechargeable hybrid and go with that. And I think there are certain price points around that are pretty good. That's the way I'd go about it at this stage. To a point where you have to fill up the tank, but you'll get about 1,000 clicks before you got to fill it up again.
Yeah, well, I think it's very early days. I really don't think we know how this is going to pan out technologically.
I don't think we do, other than there will be technological innovation which will change the way we drive. There's all sorts of things set up. I mean, we can just talk about these things right now, Jack. That whether they're EVs or whether they're ICEs, internal combustion engines, the motor vehicle manufacturers are gearing up for what will be a revolution in automobile sales, and that's where people will actually subscribe to own a vehicle that may or may not be self-driven, but they will have access to that vehicle pretty much when they want it. The car will be delivered to them, either self-drive or with the driver, and people might pay, let's say maybe $300 or $400 to have access to a vehicle when they want it. Perfect if you're living in the city. In the rest of Australia, I don't know how that works, but this is what the motor vehicle manufacturers, the big ones, the Toyotas, the Mazdas, the Fords, the Holdens, that's what they're gearing up for, and that will be a dramatic decline in sales because you'll be having one car for 5 different people.
I did this myself in the early 1990s, living in inner Melbourne. I just didn't have a car at one stage, and I was going to buy one and decided not to because I basically walked and trammed most places to commute, and then used taxis. This is even pre-Uber, but used taxis. And for a few times a year when I really needed a car, I popped down to Mr. Hertz and picked one up, and
$30.
The economics of that were terrific.
Yeah. Oh, look, if you do the sums, if you talk about the cost of a lease, if you want to buy it straight out, you wouldn't be that silly, but the cost of a lease, cost of the juice, cost of the maintenance, cost of parking, all these sorts of, add them all up. And if you don't have a vehicle and you have to rent a car, let's say 10 times a year, you're a mile in front if you rent it. And so that's the sort of basis of this new sort of car pooling system or car subscription system that will. But
that depends on where you live, though. I mean, I was living in the middle of Carlton.
Oh yeah, I mean, I couldn't do it here. I mean, well, I don't know. It depends. It just depends how efficient they are. But look, you'll always have people who want to hang on to their cars themselves because they're collectible vehicles. Of course, they're people who just like to drive. But
and they are still a status symbol for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the Australian culture about driving is so inbuilt into our culture that I think that those sorts of programs, while they might work in the big cities in Europe and the United States, won't necessarily work here so well. Great if you're living in the inner city and you don't want to pay $200 a month for parking. Minimum, I think that is, just for a car park. So, yeah, there's a lot going for it if you're in that sort of area. Jack, we want to take a very long look today at South Africa. They have an election coming up probably mid-May, I think that is.
90 days after midday, within the 90 days after midday.
Yes, I do. Yeah, I see what you say. So, yes, once the president, Cyril Ramaphosa, declares elections open, it'll run 90 days from that period. So, what are we talking about? July, August, mate.
Yeah, July, August, September.
And what we know about South Africa is post-apartheid, it has essentially become a one-party state with the African National Congress, the ANC, dominating political representation in local and national parliaments. But that might be changing, Jack.
Yeah, in the 2021 municipal election, for the first time in a national election, the ANC got less than 50% of the vote. And that's a bit of a game changer.
So tell us a little bit about what you know about some of these minority parties and where there might be some improvement to public administration in South Africa.
Well, they're a bit all over the shop. It's a bit like the internals of the old Labor Party, 2,000 factions of 3. The new player is the Economic Freedom Fighters, and they're a kind of a strange mix. They might be more extreme than the ANC on some things and less on others. It's
a strange name for a party, Jack.
It is. And then there were...
they have been in coalition with the ANC.
Yeah, they are.
Well, they are.
They are, but more or less. But in July 2023, all the other small parties decided they wanted to have a united front to campaign against the ANC and any alliance it may form with the Economic Freedom Fighters.
So we've got the Democratic Alliance, the Inkatha Freedom Party, Action SA, Freedom Front Plus. Jeez, a lot of these sounds a bit extreme, but they may not necessarily be so. The United Independent Movement and the Spectrum National Party. It's an odd name. They all released John statement last year.
Some of those are like distinguishing between the Judean People's Front and the People's Front of Judea.
Right, And they must battle, even if they are, genuine political parties who might appeal to the centre or vaguely to the left or vaguely to the right. They've had to live with them being continually routed at elections, continually spanked in elections by the ANC.
Yeah, I suspect that might be going to change because South Africa really is in
deep trouble, isn't it?
Is in deep trouble as a country, and people, even though they have a fondness for the ANC and are grateful for the ANC for bringing about the end of apartheid, etc., that patience and that confidence will be running low.
We described it in previous episodes last year as a sort of emerging gangster state. I mean, that is where corruption is rife. And this often happens where you've got, yes, the ANC were responsible for a smooth transition with the old National Party, were responsible for a smooth transition from apartheid and largely bloodless, which was astonishing. If you lived through those times, you just thought the whole place was going to blow up. But in more recent times, the ANC has failed to be fit for purpose. And we're seeing some of the indicators around there. Violent crime, for example, it's basically just rising to. It's always been bad for certainly the last 20 or 30 years, but is now sort of peaking in all-time highs. Security van heists are commonplace. The murder rate is at a 20-year high. More than 27,000 people were killed in the last year of records, so going back a couple of years, and the number solved only 1 in 8. So that's basically you're getting away with murder, and that's never a good sign.
I was talking to a banker who had occasion to visit Johannesburg recently, and they have. We'll get to this. They have a problem with brownouts of power shutdowns. So quite often the red light cameras, the red lights are not working. But even when the red lights are working, if you're in a hire car, they won't stop at a red light because they believe that if they stop at a red light, there's a high risk
going to get jacked
of carjacking. So you're in lawless times when people are going to ignore red lights because they're more frightened of being shot than they are of being in a car accident.
Yes, and these sorts of robberies can become, extended episodes of abduction, kidnapping, very violent offending that is just, again, the rates of it are really staggering compared to Australia. It's sort of almost about up by a factor of 20. Really,
one of the things that is interesting about the upcoming election is that there are still moves for a succession by the Western Cape, which is Cape Town and its surrounds,
right?
Because the Western Cape is doing much better economically, security-wise. Much smaller crime problem, all that sort of stuff, and it's a non-ANC province,
and they're not just like Western Australians.
No. It's a different. The Western Australians want to succeed because they want to keep all the money from the iron ore and the gas, etc.
You're going to have to spend a little bit of that on defence, aren't they?
Yeah, but the Western Cape succession movement, it doesn't have the support of the major parties because they're both national parties and want to. Their aim is to get hold of.
I believe the Western Cape,
the whole of South Africa.
Sorry. The Western Cape was a separate sort of colony, wasn't it, under the British?
Yes, it has a slightly different history to the.
I remember the Western Cape stamps.
Yeah, it has a slightly different history to the rest of South Africa. That's correct.
All right.
It was more British than Dutch, for instance.
Yes. Okay, I got you. Yeah. All right. So, actually, a senior official of the ruling African National Congress has actually said South Africa is on the verge of becoming a failed state, Jack, and that was from the ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula. And these load shedding or brownouts that they're experiencing go for 10 hours a day, up to 10 hours a day. I know that Dale Stein was interviewed during the cricket last year, during the cricket in our summer last year, and he was complaining about it. Actually, he was talking about the fact that basically it's almost impossible to reside there with brownouts occurring. So it's not just like it's a 5-hour block on the day. You'll go bang, and you don't know how long it's going to last, and then the power might come on after 2 or 3 hours, and then you'll have 2 or 3 hours of electricity, and then bang, it's gone again. And every time you don't know if it's going to come back on at all. It does, but you're never quite sure how long the wait's going to be. It's almost impossible to live under those circumstances.
And very, very difficult to run a business or a factory or anything of that kind.
We might have a bit of a look there. I wouldn't mind seeing some of their manufacturing figures and things like that, because I guarantee you they'll be pretty awful, particularly with these limitations.
It had been quite successful in a manufacturing sense, in part because they got tariff-free entry into the United States market, a huge market. So people, I think Mercedes-Benz build a whole type of their
big
cars
Ford
there.
plant there, I think.
Yeah,
Correct?
yeah. I think it's the C-class Mercedes, pretty much from around the world, that are made in South Africa.
Mm.
So they had been having some great successes, but very hard to do that when you've got unpredictable 10-hour brownouts and you've got to send people home.
Maybe they need another Mandela Jack, because they need to. I mean, basically, they are beset with corruption, and therefore, they sort of planning infrastructure development to be fit for purpose for the needs of the country, be they residents in their homes or manufacturers or industries requiring electricity. You can't run an economy on this basis.
Yeah.
I noticed they did join BRICS, Jack. Tell us a little bit about BRICS.
Well, they're part of BRICS.
Well, they have been for a while. They had some new members join.
Yeah. Well, BRICS originally was
Brazil,
Russia,
India, China, South Africa.
And South Africa. Yeah. And South Africa hosted the meeting just recently, just a couple of weeks ago. Unfortunately, the president of Russia couldn't attend. Quite possibly because there are international warrants out for his arrest. So he joined in on the Zoom. A curious thing, all of the others, perhaps with the exception of Russia, but certainly Brazil, India and China are kind of developing economies. And you sort of wonder whether South Africa still is an emerging economy or whether it's going backwards.
Yeah. Well, the new countries that have joined BRICS, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the Emirates, Iran, and Ethiopia. And I suppose the good thing about that, Jack, is at least there's a back channel between Saudi Arabia and Iran, who, if we're going to take things to the nth degree, are basically the major likely combatants in a major conflagration in the Middle East.
Yeah, I think these kind of meetings are generally a good idea. Having people talking is generally a good idea, provided you don't confuse. It's like the UN. The UN's great for that purpose. Just don't confuse it with some kind of world government.
Yeah, I understand. But we've also got Ethiopia and Egypt there, and they're at loggerheads as well at the moment, basically over a dam, the dam of the Nile that the Ethiopians are building, and the Egyptians are most upset about. Been a fair bit of sabre rattling about that. So those two will sit around a table in these BRICS meetings. They did in fact join the 15th BRICS summit hosted in Johannesburg. Well, they probably drove straight through red lights, Jack, in order to avoid being carjacked.
Yeah, I'm sure the security was good enough for this. This brings us back to the Israel and Gaza thing. South Africa is the country that has brought the case against Israel before the International Court of Justice. And I think there's a school of thought that says the reason they're doing that is because the place is such a basket case at home, they need something to distract everyone from it.
Yeah, there's also a bit of history there too, isn't there? That Israel had supported the apartheid regime in South Africa, while virtually the rest of the world applied sanctions to the apartheid economy. Israel didn't, and maybe there's a bit of payback there, Jack.
Israel had South Africa is one of the first countries in the world to recognise Israel, and Israel, in fact, had a good relationships pre-apartheid. That is, after post-war, but before the apartheid regime started. And Israel voted against apartheid in the UN, but Israel had a close relationship with countries like South Africa and Taiwan, because they needed some friends who, like them, were being sanctioned or ostracised by the wider community.
There you go. All right, yeah, bit of, but I would think it's the apartheid, or the relationship between the Israeli government and the apartheid regime in South Africa that might cause a bit of consternation with the ANC, Jack, and that might have led to this attempt to prosecute the Israelis in the Hague.
Yeah. The International Court of Justice, the last time, what the South Africans are seeking is are some preliminary measures, which would mean that the chief judge of the ICJ would issue a call, say, for Israel to cease all activities in Gaza, etc. The last preliminary measures decision made by the ICJ was against Myanmar in its relationships with Rohingya. And it's an indication of how much effect this case will have, is that I don't think there's been any notable improvement for the Rohingya people since that 2 years ago.
Look, the ICJ is basically designed as sort of mop-up operation. So often the prosecutions are done. You've got people in jails now who've been prosecuted through the ICJ. They are people from the Balkans conflict, 10, 20 years later. Charles Taylor in West Africa. So it's essentially, I think it's a worthwhile thing for the world to have, but it has clear limitations.
But they've been prosecuted through the ICC, the International Criminal Court, rather than through the ICJ, which is a nation-state thing. So it works slightly differently.
Oh, I see. But yes, you're quite right. There's a distinction there. Yep. You're gone. Yep.
Yeah, anyway, we'll just have to wait and see how it goes. But South Africa and the election is very important, really. I think they would benefit from having a multi-party government or a multi-party state rather than being a one-party state.
Bit of a shake-up.
Almost invariably leads to corruption problems.
Bit of a shake-up required there. Yes, we know one-party states, whether by design or by happenstance, they don't lead to very good outcomes.
With the possible exception of Singapore.
Yeah, I guess that is one. But look, you could say the same for China, Jack, too, and a few other places. But in the end, if we're looking about personal freedoms and things like that, yeah, not so much. United States, Jack, over to the States now. It's election year, and of course, Trump has won New Hampshire. Nikki Halley didn't fare too badly, just about 10 points shy of the Trumpster. The thing you got to recognise, about 310,000 votes were cast, so only a small number of votes.
It's a very small state.
It's a very small state, yes, that's quite right. But this is registered Republican voters only, so you get even smaller slice of that pie. And Nikki Halley did well enough to now she considers she can stay there. and did you see the Donald speaking to the media saying, no, it was actually speaking to the faithful after or his sort of victory speech, where he talked about how Nikki Halley could be subject to investigation for things she knows about, won't talk about, and she could be investigated within about 5 minutes. And it was kind of a little bit chilling, Jack.
Yeah, well, I don't approve of people using the legal system against their political opponents by anybody doing that. I think she stays in provided the money holds up.
Yeah, she spent a fair bit of money in New Hampshire. In fact, it's sort of estimated in the tens of millions. But she didn't do too badly. Now, we moved to South Carolina, which is sort of less than a month away now, and that is her home state. But the polling is showing a clear lead to Donald Trump.
Yeah, provided she's getting the never Trump money, she'll stay in the race, I think. Ron DeSantis has given it away.
Yes, Ron's gone.
And I was asked the other day that I think that he had a chance in the future. And I said, well, look, there have been people who've lost out in the primaries who've gone on to become president, Ron Reagan, Joe Biden,
pretty rare,
and a few others. But I think with Ron DeSantis is that the things that stopped him going well in the primaries won't go away. He's just not good.
He's terrible. Let's just get it out there. I mean, he should go back to Tallahassee and sit in front of a mirror and learn how to smile for a start. Because every time he was sort of called upon to smile, there was this sort of rictus appeared on his face. He was the most unnatural looking politician I've seen. He's bright. One of the things that I noticed just from the Iowa caucus, Jack, was that Republican voters were saying they didn't like what was happening in the libraries in Florida, and they didn't want that to happen in Iowa, which I thought was really, really interesting. Don't touch our libraries. Keep your hands off our libraries. That's a pretty sort of bold move. So Iowa very different to Florida, but yeah, I found that really interesting.
Yeah, he's just not good shaking hands and meeting with people and campaigning. But there, that was a problem with Hillary Clinton. Was a problem with Mitt Romney. The people who've been good at that recently. Bill Clinton was the best, probably the best ever. George W. Bush, well, he was better than Al Gore. Obama was excellent at it. Trump's pretty good at it, but most of the rest of the candidates have not been good at that. And DeSantis is in that camp.
Yeah, he is. But I think, look, there are a couple of strategic errors he made. He had a very fine advisor that was ultimately sacked in a bit of a sort of skullduggery move, and she understood the national scene better than the other or the rest of the advisors that were on RDS's team, and they were basically Tallahassee political apparatchiks with no national experience, no ability to get a message or understanding of how to get a message across to a completely different environment, which is something you need. But overall, I think his biggest problem was that he was Trump-like, and he was appealing to the sort of MAGA slice of the vote, and he couldn't out Donald.
Yeah, I think his problem was that he was a successful state politician. It's a bit like being a good Shield cricketer, but put him in a Test match and they're not good enough.
Bowling a bit quicker, bowling a bit straighter, and it's harder to get away with. So you think she'll move on? This is Nikki Halley. You think she'll move on from a loss from South Carolina? I think that might be the end of her.
Yeah, if the money holds up, that's another month away. If the money holds up, she'll last that long. But the money determines these things. She can't afford to stay. She won't be able to.
There has been a bit of talk, and I know this is from the sort of never Trumpers and from the Democrats too, but there has been a bit of talk about Trump's, shall we say, mental faculties, Jack, the sort of stuff that beset Joe Biden over the last year or two, and this came from a speech where Trump tried to say Nancy Pelosi, but said Nikki Halley time and time again.
Yeah, I did see that. Yeah.
And you sort of got the impression that he knew that he'd made the slip, and he just decided he was going to run with it. Nikki Halley was in charge of security at the Capitol building and all this sort of stuff, which is patently untrue. And she actually got up, and I thought it was a pretty bold thing for her to do. And she said, "Look, anyone who's 80 probably doesn't have the faculties to become president of this country." And I think that's going to be a big issue as we go forward. If Trump wins his primary, Biden is essentially unchallenged through the primary process, then you're going to have America expressing a good deal of American voters expressing a good deal of frustration, particularly independent voters, that the two picks they've got are pretty ordinary, Jack. And not just pretty ordinary, but old.
Who put that really very well in the last 24 hours? David Burge from Austin, Texas. He said it's like being in a lunatic asylum and having you're strapped in, and there are two lunatics arguing over who's going to do the lobotomy on you. And he says neither of them. Thank you.
Well, it's going to come to a head. It does. I mean, the primary process, particularly if it ends earlier, probably it would advantage Bobby Kennedy Jr., who is the sort of third candidate. But his polling is really, or certainly the polling that I last looked at in December was reflective of that frustration. And he was getting sort of 25s and things, 25% support, particularly in swing states, and that sort of, I think, is just a reflection of sort of none of the above.
It is. Yeah, well, I think it's pretty clear that a majority of Americans would like to choose someone else, but the primary system isn't giving them that.
Yeah, it just isn't. It's not giving them a lot of choice at all. And if Haley's gone by South Carolina, which will be in February, then basically you've just got two old men. Sort of wandering around. Donald will be in and out of court, but
interesting thing this morning is on Twitter, a sort of Republican threw a cat amongst the pigeons by tweeting this: if Trump suddenly passed away, who should be the GOP nominee? Well, all hell broke loose after that. People were saying, why are you saying that? And he says, well, he's 77. He's above the life expectancy of a normal American male.
He's not looking all that flash either, is he? When you see him in the moments where perhaps the makeup is not on, or at the end of the day when the makeup is smudging really badly, he doesn't look flash.
Yeah, but some of his supporters were jumping in very quickly to say, look, he's in great shape and all that sort of stuff. And that caused more hilarity with the idea that he's in great shape. There were photos, et cetera, et cetera.
There have been the sort of never-Trumpers who put about the idea, and it was supported by Kevin McCarthy, that Trump smells. And that he might soil the underpants every now and then. McCarthy said only all you could smell from him was makeup, ketchup, and I forget what the other things were, but this sort of terrible cocktail where it wasn't all that flash to be downwind from him. But not so much that he was incontinent. There has been that talk for a while, and there have been photos taken. Who knows if they're genuine or not? Whether the Trumpster's got the peenie pads on. Who's going to be his vice president pick, Jack? I see Carly, former White House press secretary Carly McEnany, jumped into this. We'll talk about that in a minute. But Trump absolutely steamrolled her on social media in reply.
He did. She thought that he should go with Nikki Haley, and Trump swung back and said, if you study the history of presidential runs, a vice presidential pick has never made a difference. It's a one-night story, then they go back to regular evening viewing.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that, and anyone who's seen the wonderful show Veep, it just basically, creates that vice president who basically doesn't do anything. Their position is entirely symbolic. A job for Tucker Carlson, Jack? He's another one who's been touted.
I don't think he would go there.
yeah, probably wouldn't earn enough money, and all he'd be doing is going around opening up schools.
Yes.
So yes, Kylie McEnany, the so-called Barbie doll of communications in the White House during the Trump years, has copped a nice old slapping from the Donald for having the temerity to suggest that Nikki Halley should be a VP candidate. What more do we say about Trump, Jack? I mean, look, we know, as I understand it, then the DC trial will commence on March the 3rd. I don't think there have been any delays there.
Well, at the moment, every time there's a legal move against him, his polling goes up. It remains to be seen whether that will continue to work that way when there's actual evidence being presented. That's the unknown.
Yeah, it is,
we don't know.
Yeah, it is. But look, these things. I mean, there was talk that the trial would be suspended when the US Supreme Court, the SCOTUS, had a look at the issue of presidential immunity. It's a very, very colourful topic to be talking about. Trump's lawyers, of course, are claiming that no matter what he did when he was president, he can't be indicted for them now, or he can't be prosecuted for them now. Yeah, so look, he's got all this sort of stuff, and as baggage, and it's just impossible to know where it's all going to end.
It is. I'd say the sensible assessment is he's still the most likely person to be the president next year, but there's a lot of ifs and buts about that.
Yeah, I would say on the basis of the polling, I mean, we talked about this. Nikki Halley beating Joe Biden hands down. RDS, for all his manifest shortcomings, was beating Joe Biden hands down. But in the Trump-Biden head-to-head, there's no real clear winner. I mean, I think you look at one poll, you've got Trump a point up, or Biden a point up. So, on polling alone, and early polling in and around primaries, this part of the electoral cycle in the United States, probably not terribly indicative of what's going to happen in November. But at the same time, you would think the Republicans may, perhaps like the Democrats, should be going, we really should have better candidates. Way better candidates.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen with the Republicans. I don't think that Biden will be the candidate. That's my gut feeling. But
yeah, we could do the what ifs endlessly with the American election at the moment. I mean, what if he's in jail? What if he's convicted? There's just an endless amount of speculation that we won't get into today. The Wall Street Journal has been talking about the divide in politics, just as we have, Jack. And they have identified what we might call elites. I really dislike the term, but perhaps there are no other options.
I think this was just a word to describe. I think it's about 1% of the population, the people who earn over 150,000 US and have a postgrad qualification, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the professional class and above, if you like.
Yeah, this is a global phenomenon, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. And their views, they did this for another organisation, Rasmussen's did. They polled what they call the elites, and I agree it's a terrible word, the rest of the population, and people who are Ivy League graduates from the Ivy League schools.
Well, they're the ultra elites.
Yes, yeah. And the results were instructive. I mean, on the politics of it, the elites gave Biden an 84% approval rating. He gets 40% from the wider population. But various other things as well. The elites have a favourable view of university professors, journalists, lawyers, union leaders, and even members of Congress, whereas the wider population don't like them much at all.
Who's got any time for the Congress? I mean, I didn't know. I mean, when I look at the polling on do you think the Congress is functioning well and serving the American people, you get sort of high 80s saying no.
Yeah.
High 87, 88% saying it's a complete disaster. It needs to be reformed from the ground up.
Except for the elite.
Yeah, so it's an
I
interesting
think it's
take,
going
isn't
okay.
it?
And,
I
and
mean,
even simpler things like how much would you pay to ameliorate climate change, for instance? You know, the great unwashed, the ordinary people say, well, $100 a year would top it out. And the elites say, well, we pay whatever it costs. You know, it's how much is there enough government? No, it's all quite different. There is a real divide on a whole series of questions between the professional class and the wider population, and I suspect that probably applies in other parts of the Western world as well, the UK, Australia, France.
yeah, and what I'd say there is that the Liberal Party really haven't had a presence in those electorates where these sort of, like, I guess what we might be calling blue collar type issues, and I know that's a term we probably should use a lot less of too, but sort of working Australians, low and middle income earners, and I think there's a great race on for their support between Labor and the coalition.
Yeah,
as well. But the Liberal Party are hampered somewhat because they've never really spent a lot of time in there.
yes,
They don't have the structure there. They don't have the ability to deliver volunteers and door knock and do all the things. The grassroots stuff has to happen.
This has happened before. In 1949, Robert Menzies won the first big post-war election because he was able to appeal what he called the forgotten Australians, and they were the small business people, the tradespeople, all that sort of stuff.
Women.
And women, and he got that took him into power, and they stayed there for 23 years. But it's not an easy thing to do. But the same situation keeps coming up in not just in the United States, but in Australia, in the UK. It's front and foremost in what's going to be an interesting battle for an election there this year.
And as I said, global phenomenon, and it's whoever can speak to these people clearly and effectively is going to win that contest. As I say, in Australia, the Liberal Party start from the back of the field because they really don't have a dedicated party structure running through the outer suburbs. But, Jack, if we stay with the American stuff, the US economy is absolutely on fire. The Dow Jones hit record highs during the week this week. Inflation now at well below controllable band, up to down to about 2.4. I'm looking at their growth rate. The US economy will expand by 2.5, which is a bit tepid, but compared to Europe, Germany, Britain, etc., it's a lot quicker. Their inflation rate, well, I don't have the figure in front of me. I think it's got a 2 in front of it as well. And an enormous amount of job growth in the United States. So there are very good signs on the US economy.
The inflation rate's down to 3.2, I think.
3.2, okay.
From 9%, but down from 9% last year to 3.2. So it ought to be, or people ought to be feeling better about it, but they are not. And that's
these things do take
phenomenon.
a while to filter into household budgets. One of the huge points of anger was the spike in oil price and at the Bowser, and people with their large American cars, Jack, having a drop. Well, be 120 here, probably be about 80 for them, and that was making people very, very angry. Great drivers, of course, but the gas price is down. They've got some very good figures. But it's not filtering through. On the polling so far, not coming through. But certainly the Democrats are at least starting to talk about it, which they should have been talking about a little while ago, and saying, look, the economy's in pretty good shape. And if you do look at solid economies, and if the US economy continues to roll, the market's overflowing with money, then generally speaking, you're in a pretty solid position to be re-elected. I mean, with all of the
yes.
other constraints around Biden put to one side.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
It's not working yet. It should be, but it's not.
Not yet. All right. Now, we want to now move into the world of sport, Jack. BBL, Brisbane Heat won it. Has the BBL been a success? It's hard to know. I think they've abbreviated the season. There was a sense of an almost endless competition going on there that started in early December and finished around about this time, late January. And they've abbreviated the season. They made some rule changes and things like that. I think they bragged last night at the final that there had been 1 million people go through the turnstiles around the country. Always strongly supported. The Perth Scorchers always strongly supported in Perth. Adelaide Strikers also draw in big crowds. The MCG looks a bit sparse when the two Melbourne sides play there, and I must say that the Sixers who played in the final against Heat last night, they get good numbers at the SCG. The thing I'd say about this competition that makes it a really sound one and worth watching is that you're seeing the next level of development coming into the Australian side. So Fraser McGurk, who's been selected to play in the Australian ODIs, he is going to be special, mate. He hits it well. Very odd name. He's moved to South Australia from Victoria and got a bit of a new lease of life there. Hits the ball as well as anybody. And so you're actually seeing these players come through. There've been a lot of foreign players play historically in the competition. I suspect less so this year. There've been a few Englishmen come across. I suspect, but less so than last year. And that's what I like about the BBL. Maybe other people don't, but I like to see these emerging young players, the 20, 21-year-olds, and see how they get on.
Did the Sixers play last night?
Well, they didn't play all that well, it must be said. And I actually thought they were the form side in the competition, expected them to go really, really well. But Brisbane too good. And it followed an innings. I'm just looking for his name.
Josh Brown.
Josh Brown, my Lord. The 140 odd he got at Carrera. Mate, it's rare you see batting like it. I mean, he made about 2/3 of the score. He dominated every bowler that he faced and just hit them out of the park for fun. 12 sixes, which is a record in an innings. And this is a guy who battles to get a Guernsey for his state and plays around the sort of periphery of club cricket, and he's got particular skills at hitting the ball a very long way. I suspect there'll be people in India going, we could pick him up for a bit of a song.
Yes, it was quite something to watch. One rather felt for the bowling and fielding side. There didn't seem to be anything they could do.
It's rare you see this complete domination in any form of cricket, a complete domination of bat over ball. And really, once he got to about 80, it was just six or out. I'm just going to hit the ball, next ball for six. And most of the time he did. Extraordinary innings. Well done to him. He did it in front of his mum and dad, which is lovely too. And he seemed like a really humble bloke. Big boy. Hits the ball a long way. So again, there's a guy with a big future in the club. In the national level, the other guy that you sort of look at and think, oh wow, how's he missing out? What a good cricketer he is, Michael Neser. Fantastic bowler, hits the ball a long way. Wonderful field. He's almost made an art form of these catches over the boundary line and flick it back in. And so it's just a bit of a reminder too. We saw Scotty Bowen having a bowl for the Melbourne Stars, or they continue to underperform. But you just do see these guys who are on the periphery. Michael Neeser, mate, if we had just one or two gaps in that fast bowling lineup for Australia, he would be, sort of bloke who'd take 200 Test wickets easy. He's a really good player. So yeah, I think it's been a great success. I watch it. There is a sense of a bit of wallpaper about it sometimes. That that the wallpaper's on. You got the BBL, and you might not always be watching that closely. But and the other side of that, well, the add-on to that is if a T20 game is one-sided, it's almost unwatchable.
A bit like last night, the final was pretty dull.
Dull, yeah, not a lot of crowd noise.
But look, I think it goes well. It's I think they got the timing right. It ought to finish about the Australia Day weekend when people are going back to work from their summer holidays. It's perfect summer holiday time filler for people to have, as you say, on in the background. Watch it closely when it gets a bit exciting towards the end. Even here at my local in Hong Kong, the American guys will keep an eye on it and watch closely for the last 5 overs if it's a good run chase.
Yeah, this is my tip on how to watch a T20. Watch the first 4 to 6 overs to see how the openers are going. If they're going really, really well, then keep watching. If not, they're sort of 2 for 30 or something like that after 4. Just keep an eye on things, and then towards the end of the innings, watch it a bit more closely, and do the same for the other innings. But yeah, if an opening bat like Josh Brown gets hold of a side, and it is rare, it's the only 100 that was made in the BBL this year. It is.
What was it, 140 off 55 or 60, wasn't it?
Yeah, something of that order. It was the most. You don't see innings like that very often. Just complete domination of ball. Wouldn't matter who's bowling. He's hit everyone out of the attack. But we go to the longer form of the game, Australia v the Windies, Jack, and that starts tomorrow. And look, I think the West Indies in Adelaide performed admirably. I think they bowled well. I thought they fielded well, but their batting, it just lacks experience. And they're facing, let's face it, the best attack in the world. So that's the struggle.
They just need to play more Test cricket. Meanwhile, in India, and it starts tomorrow as well, India v England.
Yeah, it's a big series.
A big series, which will come on right about beer o'clock for me, which is perfect.
So I'll certainly be watching a lot of it. They've been hotly contested Test series, particularly England in India. They go okay there. Joe Root's made a lot of runs over there. In fact, there was a rather wonderful piece that Michael Atherton introduced on Twitter of Kevin Peterson talking about how he liked to bat in India and how he perhaps lost his way a bit early on and just needed to make some adjustments. He found himself just propping on the front foot a bit too much, and he went through these drills that got him just watching the ball before he moved forward. So the forward movement, if it came, he'd be able to get back on the back foot too. But if the forward movement, if it came, he was hitting the ball just around about the same time as his foot hit the side, as his foot hit the turf. So going to be a great series. I just think India's bowling attack's going to be a bit strong for him, mate.
Yeah, the Englishmen are talking about maybe one seamer and 3 spinners in the first test in Hyderabad.
Well, they have got a visa now for one of the young tweakers who's a Muslim boy.
It looks like a dust bowl already, so that'll be very interesting to see. DRS has changed cricket in India quite a bit, I think, because you used to be able to prop on the front foot and kick the off spinner away.
That's what Peterson was saying.
Yeah. And DRS has changed all that because you're going to get pinged LBW even if your front foot's quite a way down now.
Yeah, there's restrictions to the DRS in terms of ball tracking. I think it's 3 metres from the crease. If you go further than that, then it can't be out. But yeah, I still don't know that DRS or the ball tracking is scientific enough to be reliable. I mean, there's talk now, where you've got umpires call, and if the umpires pinged you out and the ball manages to flick the stumps, okay. But if the umpire said not out and the ball flicks the stumps, then it remains not out, even though the ball was even just shaving the stumps and would remove the bail. So should we just go to a straight DRS if it's hitting? Yes, it's out. If it's not, just move on. Forget the umpire's call.
Yeah, no, I kind of like it the way it is. I mean, look, the real reason we had DRS was to get rid of the real howler decisions, and I think we've taken a little bit too far the other way of saying, well, we're going to decide everything by DRS. I don't kind of like that. Well,
just statistically, Jack, if you left the umpires to make their decisions, you would get them being right 92% of the time. And that includes clean bowl dismissals and fly ball catches on the boundary. But with DRS, it's 99. So there's still that 1% that we're not covering. But yeah. So you're getting rid of basic mistakes, and I just think we need. I suppose if you take away the umpire's call, then you'd have people appealing and just go straight upstairs. And maybe that's not a good look either. So
maybe it'd be a time waster. They appeal for everything.
Yeah. Okay. Tennis, Jack. Who wins the Australian Open? It's got to be
probably Djokovic again.
Yeah. I mean, look, whatever. I mean, is he the GOAT? His numbers say yes.
Yeah. He's still a very unlikable fellow.
He's not easy to like, is he? Not easy to like. But there was quite a lot of controversy about the crowd behaviour, and not so much crowd behaviour, but what was permitted and what wasn't. And some of the players got a bit upset about movement from the crowd after a game. And you think, well, just get on with it, man. If you didn't have people watching you, you wouldn't be getting the whatever it is for a first round contest. I mean, win, lose or draw, you're walking away with 100,000 for a first round game. And,
one thing they have to fix up is starting games at 10 or 11 o'clock at night.
They seem to love that. I don't know if Channel 7 on the hook to them saying, look, can we just keep going? Because we'd like people to watch games at 5 o'clock in the morning. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It doesn't seem to make any sense to me.
Yeah, and people aren't going to do that. I mean, they might set up the telly in the bedroom and fall asleep watching, but seriously, who's going to watch a game of tennis at 3 o'clock in the morning? That's when the only time we do that is when the Ashes is on. Don't we? We learn to live without sleep. All righty. Well, that covers all of our news for the day, Jack. Unless you've got something silly to take us out.
Look, a very important court case in India at the moment. This is all over Indian social media. It's not quite as big as the cricket, but it's big. It's a court case between two restaurant chains over who has the right to claim that they invented butter chicken and dal makhani.
Well, we know the source of what's the British staple Indian
chicken tikka masala.
Chicken tikka masala. We know the origins of that in the UK, but butter chicken. I don't know.
Yeah,
it is the Western meal of choice, isn't it? Particularly the cricketers. And so, they did do an interview. And when you go to India, what do you eat? And every one of them said butter chicken and nothing much else.
Yeah. It started either in Delhi, and we can narrow it down. There are two restaurant chains, Moti Mahal and what's the other one called? Kundamla Gujarat.
Right, loggerheads.
Yep, and it's a matter of dispute, and it's before the courts as we speak. And a decision will probably be later in the year.
We're going to need an update. Okay, we're going to need an update there, Jack, so keep an eye for it. So who has the rights? Are we talking about copywriting, trademarking here?
Yeah, it's not quite either of those. It's just a question of one restaurant chain trying to prevent the other from saying that they were the founder, that they invented the recipe.
It's like the Chico roll in Australia, Jack, where there is this hot dispute over which country town came up with it. I can't remember which one. There's one in
Oh, it's
Victoria, and
Bendigo,
there's one
I
in
think,
New
isn't
South Wales. Look, if you're gonna put your credentials up as we invented the Chico roll, I think you're probably not going to get a lot of the tourist
that's a
dollar coming
problem.
through your door. All right, thanks very much, mate. And that takes us out this week. And we'd love to hear from you, by the way. So do as our good mate Ray has done this week, and drop us a line. We did have I did have a few comments from our great farming mate, but they weren't really comments about the show. And we'll so like I say, drop us a line. You can get hold of me. My DMs are always open on X, formerly known as Twitter. That's at Jack the Insider there, and you can get hold of Jack if you want to on his what's it called?
On hongkongjack.substack.com.
On his Substack. So there you go. Drop us a line if you want to. DMs are always open, and we'd love to read out your letter or your comment on our show. And that takes us out for the week. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks, Jack. We'll talk to you later, and bye, listeners.
Cheers, mate.